for upcoming events. And now for the speaker. Elaine Kessinger has a lifelong love of history and need to bring history alive for others. She's been researching and sharing history for over 20 years. Her interest in female staff for the Army Medical Department comes much as it did for the female staff themselves, a desire to do something at living history events. Please welcome Elaine Kessinger.
Good afternoon. When someone embarks upon a presentation, they always advise you, start with a joke. Well, I don't do jokes very well, but I do dramatic readings just fine. So today we're going to start with a dramatic reading from Hospital Sketches by Louisa May Alcott. I want something to do. This remark, being addressed to the world in general, no one in particular felt it their duty to reply. So I repeated it to the smaller world around me and received the following suggestions and settled the matter by answering my own inquiry, as people are apt to do when very much in earnest. Write a book, quoth the author of my being. I don't know enough, sir. First live, then write. Try teaching again, suggested my mother. No, thank you, ma'am. 10 years of that was quite enough. Take a husband like my Darby and fulfill your mission, said Sister Joan, home on a visit. Can't afford the expensive luxuries, Mrs. Corbett. Turn actress and immortalize your name, said Sister Vashti, striking an attitude. I won't. Go nurse the soldiers, said my young neighbor Tom, panting for the tented field. I will. So, for me, it started much like her. I wanted something to do. And my friend, who portrays a surgeon, wanted someone who would sit and watch at his events his $3,000 worth of antique and reproduction medical equipment. And he suggested, well, try researching a hospital matron. I will. And in the 15 plus years of reading the stories of female hospital staff in the Civil War era, the one thing that is constant is inconsistency. No one woman had the same experience as the others. No one title had the same tasks assigned, and no tasks had the same title consistently. It was inconsistent. And as a researcher, that's the bane of our existence, right there. So in 2023, how many of us have been in a hospital? Ever. And do you remember your nurses? Yeah. Now, do you remember who cleaned your rooms? Do you remember who brought your food? Do you remember who cooked your food? Probably didn't even see them. Do you remember who changed out your laundry? Or who did your laundry? And do you remember who took you from place to place? Today we have very specific tasks assigned to specific caregivers. In the 19th century, that was not the case. But it is because of the female staff in the 19th century during the Civil War that we have that today. They were putting those first footsteps in place towards the kind of patient care that we enjoy today. So when I tell you one story to represent almost 22,000. I don't really give you a full picture of a Civil War female staff person. But instead today, I'm going to try to put into context how they brought order from that chaos, how they brought the standardization from that inconsistencies. And we start even further back in history at the dawn of America. When the military of the United States was first formed, the idea of a woman providing patient care in a military hospital was no big deal. It was not unusual. It was expected. The Army Register, which is their official document that says, what everybody does and how much they get paid, and their official document. It gives a pay and provision scale and a list of tasks for the female attendants in a military hospital. So it was not at all unusual. In an 1853 report from the West Point Military Academy, they didn't have a hospital matron, and they were saying, we feel that lack. And that is because when we're ill, today, just as then, we first go to mommy. So, Mama, I don't feel well. Well, she has the medical care of her family. She is the first diagnostician. Well, if you hadn't eaten all of your Halloween candy in one go, yeah. She probably will start with some food remedies. Ginger ale, mint tea. She may start with over-the-counter remedies, Pepto-Bismol, Imodium, and things like that. And if she happens to be out or wants something beyond what she has at home, then she will go to an apothecary, which is sort of like a CVS, Walgreens, something along those lines. And she might consult with the druggist or chemist and say, hey, this is what's going on. Can he take that with these kind of medicines? What's good for this? And if those medicines still don't do the trick, she has the power to call in the doctor. In the 19th century, the doctor came to you. And she also has the authority to follow the doctor's instructions or not. If he suggests something that is so far out of her experience and the experiences of the women she knows, chances are she's going to declare him a quack and go, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this other thing. And she's also got the cleaning of the slop bowls and the chamber pots, and she's got the laundering of the soiled clothing, and she's got entertaining the patient when he's on bed rest, and she gets to cheer the rehabilitation, and she will listen to the stories in the night, and if he passes on, she's the one who closes his eyes and prepares him for burial. And this is just what a mother was expected to do. And so in a military fashion, if you need a mother, we'll supply one for you, or four. So by the 1840s, the Army Register has stopped listing female nurses and matrons and the support staff. So the war with Mexico, we don't really see mentions of specific nurses and matrons associated with the hospitals. We see local women who are overrun by battle, and yeah, we're going to help out. In Britain, in the 1850s, they're lauding Florence Nightingale's work as if it is completely revolutionary. Wow, let's put women in the hospitals. So what changed in that generation? The concept of the separate sphere. So men had care of the public sphere, such as war and medical care and the army, and women had care of the domestic sphere, such as care of young children and cleaning and cooking. But sometimes the practicalities kind of blurred the lines a little, such as who is going to cook for war? Who is going to clean a hospital? The hospitals, prior to the Civil War, are the last place you want to go. They are the last resort of the truly desperate. And whenever possible, the patient care was done at home. You wanted to avoid that hospital for as long as you can, forever, if at all. And each civilian hospital and medical clinic and infirmary usually did have some women on staff, especially in their women's wards. But these were not the women you might expect, and they were not doing the tasks that you might associate with nurses today. Most of the hospitals served as a lab practicum for surgeons and physicians, and the patients often served as their experimental subjects, sometimes without their knowledge. And as the patients were unable to afford the medical care any other way, they were kind of seen as society as kind of less than human. You know, they are lazy, poverty-stricken. There's something wrong with them that they don't have a family to take care of them. And so it was the religious-based charities that are ministering to the deserving poor. And they have this hope that these depraved creatures would be redeemed from the moral degradation that had led them into poverty. And just as the male church elders filled the boards of the hospitals, so too did the female church elders seek the fundraising for hospitals, the outfitting of the hospitals, and they set up that moral code that the patients had to abide by to receive care. So if idle hands are the devil's plaything, who better to do the scut work in a hospital except female prisoners on work release? And we all know how they wound up in prison in the first place, right? Yeah. So many of these early female staff were paid in drinking alcohol, and they kind of took an indifference to their duties. After all, why do I have to be tidy if I'm scrubbing the gore off the floor of the surgical suite? I'd rather not be sober looking at that kind of thing. And so they were seen as kind of not much better than the patients themselves, and certainly not human, certainly not women like we know them, like our daughters and sisters and mothers and wives. And the military was quite certain that they absolutely did not want the influence of those kind of women on their servicemen. Because war was men's business and we ought to let the men get on with it. Well, maybe the Catholic sisters or immigrants or the enslaved, but those aren't really women as we know them, right? Not really. Entirely different world. So at the start of the Civil War, there was only one military hospital. There were several old age homes for sailors, but those were more of an assisted living facility for sailors and Marines who had matured out of service, hadn't gotten around to getting a family, or ones who didn't have a family to help them after a grievous injury. The one hospital, as we would understand the term, was in St. Louis, and it served as a depot for the regular Army and the frontier postings. So as the war begins in earnest, the medical department themselves is scrambling to organize and to care for the casualties that all of a sudden here they are, and contagious diseases, oh yeah, we forgot about that. And they were putting in place the protocols for their own professionalization. So again, the prevailing theory is that war is men's business. So they really tried to keep the women out as much as they could. So each regiment would have a surgeon or several, usually a physician who volunteered with the men of the unit. And the pharmacist would come on as a hospital steward or be detached from another regiment to help out. And when they did have an organized hospital, they would detach men from the enlisted men from their usual duties to have the tasks of patient care, cooking, cleaning, and that sort of thing. And the regimental command was kind of reluctant to let too many rifles go. So the patients themselves were serving as the nurses. They were doing the patient care, cooking, cleaning. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm sick, the last thing I want to do is take care of somebody else. It's like, no. Cleaning, yeah, that can wait. Cooking, yeah, nothing sounds good except maybe sleep. Wake up and help you to the bathroom for the 5th time tonight just because you're bored. Mommy, make him stop. So many of the patients of these early war military hospitals are writing home about their conditions. And the women, finally something to do. So they start flocking to the hospitals, determined to help. So Mary Bickerdyke, and that's a photo of her there, was sitting in church one Sunday morning, hearing a report from a parishioner who had volunteered, and she gathered up treats and news from home and several of the male church elders, and off she headed to the military hospital, determined to do what she could. And she was just appalled, absolutely appalled. And she really couldn't find anyone else to do the cleaning or the cooking. And so she gathered up the mobile patients and set them to cleaning up the tents and cooking, soup and coffee and, emptying out the chamber pots and the slop buckets and doing what she could. And finally, the beleaguered surgeon comes across her and, "Madam, who are you?" And she persuaded him, after giving him a thorough talking to, she persuaded him to allow her to stay and do what she could. She became known as Mother Bickerdyke. Now the term mother, we think of, little lady with her cane and, frilly bonnet maybe. She was 44. I'm a little bit older than that, if that'll put it in perspective to you. Another hospital patient. He's in the hospital in Washington City. And he writes home to his brother, "Oh, woe is me, they're trying to kill me. They're taking horrible care of me, and I will expire at any moment." And of course, Walt Whitman is going to come and care for his brother, only to find out, oh, well, it was but a scratch, and brother has been returned to his unit. And so Walt Whitman agreed to stay on and do for the other soldiers what he didn't get the chance to do for his brother. So these are just two of the many, many volunteers who flocked to the hospitals upon hearing stories that they were being mistreated, that, that these protocols were not working. So as we move into 1862, the volunteer units are now trained up and they are deployed to the front alongside the regulars, and the medical department is beginning to settle in, and they too are beginning to take note of what works and what doesn't. And a typical scenario would go as follows. A soldier was wounded in battle, and his company would move on. And they'd come back to him, if they could, or they'd send somebody, just hang on, we'll get to you. And after the battle had calmed enough, the surgeons and hospital stewards and whatever volunteers they could come up with would go looking for particular casualties. Not just any Union soldier, but it had to be one from Michigan in this regiment, or it had to be one in Illinois from that regiment, their particular people. And this took days, as you might imagine. And the ambulances were not always under the control of the medical staff. They were officially out of the quartermaster department. So we have situations where company command would take them to take civilians out of the way or dispense ammunition to the far point of the field. So the ambulances were not there when they needed them. And finally, there was no designated group of people. It was just whomever they could get together. So once they're stabilized, they're transported to a field dressing station or a field hospital, and they were moved to a staging area for transport by train, ship, or ambulance to a general or volunteer hospital. And then, if needed, they'd be further transferred on to a convalescent hospital. And in the point between being removed from the field to when they are finally in that general or volunteer hospital, they're essentially off the rolls entirely. Their unit has moved on, and they've declared them presumed casualty, so they're not drawing rations from their unit. They're not yet on the hospital's rolls as an official casualty, so they're not really getting their issue from the hospital. So these several days are a really important time. So this is where the commissions and the purveyor nurses like Cornelia Hancock and Clara Barton and the Sanitary Commission, the Christian Commission, this is really their heyday, because they come in and they are able to offer things like food, clothing that isn't bullet-ridden, some medical care. Understand that this was always under the direction of military medical staff. This wasn't just some vigilante woman doing her thing. They were always under direction, even if it wasn't right there, right now. So too, the women who lived in the area and saw the battle come right over their doorstep and into their barnyards. They also would sometimes provide care, not always graciously. And down in history, these women are also called nurses. Most of these women would not consider themselves such. Certainly not the professional nurses from the hospitals, but rather they were considering themselves, what any housewife would do. And again, the Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission would have agents, often men and usually civilian physicians, who would bring supplies in and assist with the medical care and food and treats and things like that. And it was their habit to ask the surgeons and the hospital stewards, what can we do? And so in early 1862, Surgeon General Hammond was promoted, and he was tasked with revolutionizing and reorganizing the medical department, make it more efficient. These protocols clearly aren't working. Let's clean this up. And he appointed Surgeon Letterman to address that. And so he put the ambulances, again, under the control of the medical department. He took the surgeons and assistant surgeons and hospital stewards, evaluated their skills and knowledge and talents, and put them to work at the brigade level rather than the regiment. So we weren't running all over the fields trying to find our particular, if he's blue, we're going to treat him. If he's gray, yeah, we'll treat him eventually. There was no more hot potato over who's going to go out and get the casualties. They had a dedicated ambulance corps to go with those ambulances and stretchers. And these were put into effect at South Mountain and Antietam. So in December of 1862, when the Sanitary Commission agents had gathered their agents and supplies and were prepared to take on Fredericksburg, Commission Agent Stiles says, after the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Army went into winter quarters, and owing to its improved organization and its nearness to the base of supplies at Washington, it has needed far less supplemental aid than it had done at any previous time. Finally, they had found their protocols. Where next? So the Sanitary Commission could move on to things like fundraising. They could open things like the Soldier's Rest, which is an early prototype for the USO canteens and the officers' clubs, and would even go so far as to bring in entertainment into the Soldier's Rests. So that would feel very familiar. So moving into 1863, our casualty is now stabilized. He's been sent to a general or volunteer hospital. And these are the hospitals that we would recognize as such. They are organized into wards. They are a stationary place. They are removed from the worst of the fighting. They are near transportation and supplies, and often in large urban centers. Patients were brought in by train and ship, and a few by ambulance. And these were the hospitals that Dorothea Dix was geared to revolutionize with female staff. If we think of these hospitals like a human body, the surgeon, right up on top, he's the brains of the operation. He's making all of the decisions and directing the other parts of the body to work. The hospital steward is the heart. Everything is going through him, and he is compounding medicines, and he is seeing that the wards are cleaned and well ventilated and furnished, and everything is inventoried in octuplicate, because this is the Army and we go nowhere without paperwork. And he sees that the meals are delivered on time, and the foodstuffs are accounted for, and the vendors paid, and the meals are consistent with the diet, and all of the personal items of the soldiers are accounted for and kept and neat and tidy, and. He has a huge job, and he needs help. Now, in our ideal world, they're going to the men for that help. And they quickly saw that that was not going to work. Each of the hospitals were allowed to organize themselves in their own way, and they did. So once they allowed the women to come in, some women were allowed to change dressings, some were forbidden from changing dressings, some women were allowed to comb the hair and provide barbering, some women weren't. Some women were allowed to, take a wash basin around and help them wash their face and hands. Usually it was a male attendant who gave a full body bath, so, privates for the privates, as she says. Some women were allowed to organize holiday festivities. Most of the women were required to clean, empty the chamber pots and slop bowls, oversee the meals and medications. Some of the women had to do laundry. Some of the women had to do cooking. Generally, they preferred the men for that, and they got into some pretty big conflicts. So when there is a vacuum in hierarchy, they're going to seek to create their own. So they just let the women in. They didn't say, you're going to be in charge and you're not in charge and you do this and you do that. So the women took it on themselves to do just that. Some of them came from a socioeconomic status where they had servants to do the cooking and cleaning and the scut work. And they were very quick to be like, yeah, don't you have somebody else to do that? And some of them were quick to fight over some of the choicer tasks like letter writing and entertaining. And some of them were just, let's get it done. So finally, Mr. Woodward, in his book, The Hospital Steward's Manual, gives a suggestion. It will generally be found convenient where female nurses are employed for the surgeon to appoint the most intelligent and reliable to be directress of female nurses, whose duty it shall be to supervise, to oversee the washing and the distribution of clean clothes, the linen room and its appurtenances, the issue of delicacies for the sick, and the extra diet kitchen for their preparation. The remaining female nurses will, in every case, have their special duties designed through the directress by the surgeon in charge. They may be conveniently assigned to the care of the cleanliness of the patients as to dress and person, the supervision, preparation, and administration of extra diets and beverages, and such watching and other care of the sick as the medical officers may direct. So he finally puts the liaison in between there and says, I'm not going to talk to 12 of you, I'm going to talk to one of you. And she's going to talk to you. By the same token, it goes back up the chain. You got an issue, you take it to her. She's the one who takes it to him. In 1863, Surgeon General Hammond informed the hospital surgeons that female staff from Miss Dix would be appointed to the hospitals unless they employed someone of their own choosing. Most of them had already chosen women of their own, female staff without Miss Dix's intervention. So going into 1864, the medical department had their protocols in place. The hierarchy of female staff was sorted under a directress. The relief organizations had a clear idea of how best to offer help, and the world noticed and wanted to follow suit, because clearly we were doing something right. So you'll recall I said the hospital kitchens are one of those bones of contention. The hospital diets are organized into 3 meals. The regular diet, which is comparable to the soldier in garrison or camp, especially when he's well supplied. The half diet, which would be a lower portion, half portion. And the special diet, which includes the foods that are thought to be healthful to someone who is recovering. So, beef tea and farina and all of those lovely cereals. The main hospital kitchen was responsible for the 3 diets, and the enlisted men were the most common cooks. Contraband men were the next most commonly employed, but it was the extra diet kitchen. Now, extra diet is the special things that the surgeon can order special. So sometimes the relief organizations would, provide a treat. They would provide a holiday dinner, citrus, pickles, lemonade. And some of the female staff would sometimes take it upon themselves to cook, those that needed cooked. And sometimes they were in the way of getting the meals out. And sometimes they used the wrong selection of cookware, because that was the only cookware that they had. So most of the hospitals had worked it out, but there was a woman named Annie Wittenmeyer who made the official suggestion to first Surgeon General Hammond and then finally to Abraham Lincoln himself that the women be given direction of the special diet kitchens, and also that a culinary matron be employed to oversee the regular ones. The enlisted men would still be reporting to the steward, but she was there in case he needed suggestions. And again, most of them had already figured it out, but this just made it official. Finally, they're professionals. So as the peace accord was signed and the volunteer soldiers returned to their lives, so too was the hospital disbanded. And most of the surgeons returned to the role of physician, and the hospital stewards returned to the apothecaries, and so too the nurses returned to their homes. Some of them would go on to simply be a housewife, take care of children, their home. Some of them would go on to be social reformers, especially in the areas of healthcare. And as the years passed and more of the Civil War soldiers themselves were eligible for a pension, the nurses said, well, hey, what about us? We fought a battle too. It was against disease and for health, but it was definitely a battle, and we are forever changed. And so as 1892 comes along, they finally get that pension, and that is when we see a whole flurry of memoirs being published. A lot of the women came forth at that time and wrote of their experiences. And those 30 years had a chance to kind of soften some of the worst. And it also had a tendency to romanticize some of the worst. And if you had that real issue, it had had 30 years to fester. So, flat out statistics. And these are coming from Women at the Front, Hospital Workers at Civil War America, by Jane E. Schultz. She took a deep dive into the carded service records, and she came with 21,208 women total. Now, these are women who applied for a pension, so we have their information on file. It's not necessarily all of them who were awarded a pension, just that they applied. Of them, 6,284 said their title was nurse. 10,870 said their title was matron. 1,011 said cook. 2,189 said laundress. And 755 said something else, such as a chambermaid, dining room girl, seamstress, and things like this. Now, the one name, when we say Civil War nurse, that comes up time and time and time again is Dorothea Dix. Oh, she was the first one to get women in the hospitals. She was. She was also ineffectual from the first year because they wouldn't let her be effectual. She appointed 582 total. So 6% of the nurses, 2% of the matrons, less than 1% of the laundresses, and less than 1% of the cooks. And all of them were white women. Yeah. That doesn't mean that women of color didn't serve. They most certainly did. They were approximately 10% of the total of female nurses, which is commensurate with the number of men of color serving in the troops. Again, 6% of the nurses, 7% of the matrons, 19% of the laundresses. Okay, clearly I made a typo. Oops. And 36% of the cooks. So we can see where their numbers were concentrated. So Miss Dix, yeah, 6%. So everybody's like, oh yeah, no. She was, she had all of these rules, and she was such a dragon lady, and all of this kind of thing. 6%. 94% were free to go their own way. So, people love the names. So here it comes, and I'm probably going to get emotional because this is International Nurses Day, and heroes, all of them. From the saintly mother to the slovenly creature to the frontline hero, we see the evolution of professional patient care. And this is some of the lasting impacts. Because of Dorothea Dix, women are a vital part of the military hospital administration. They are. Because of Phoebe Yates Pember, women are part of the supply team for the hospitals. Everything is inventoried, stocked, conveniently assembled. Because of the lady of Ward E, Mother Bickerdyke, and over 22,000 others, your nurse is going to be taking really good care of you today. Because of Susie Taylor King, Lucy Nichols, and Helen Gibson, you'll receive care no matter what color your skin is. Because of Evie and Betty, your hospital room, surgery suite, and surgeon's office will be cleaned, well ventilated, and free from the nasty things that we don't want to think about. Because of Greta and Bridget, your laundry will be cleaned, returned promptly, and well mended. Because of Annie Wittenmeyer, you will receive nutritious food, appropriate for your care, prepared safely, in a kitchen that runs with calm efficiency. Because of Clara Barton, Cornelia Hancock, women are combat medics, MASH staff, and supplies reach your medical team no matter where they are. Because of the United States Sanitary Commission, you'll receive a cheery welcome at every layover. A holiday dinner will find you, and the leading entertainers will do a special show just for you. Because of the United States Sanitary Commission, you'll receive spiritual counsel if you want it. Because of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker and Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, your surgeon might be a woman. Because of Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, your surgeon may be a woman of color. And because of the 22,000 plus female staff of the Civil War era hospitals, women have something to do. Thank you.